One of those industries which has been very hard hit by coronavirus is the movie theater industry. A good example is AMC, which is the largest chain in the world, which had a 91% fall in revenue in the third quarter of this year. Such falls have led to many people pointing out that there are big problems. And while it is rare for people to suggest that this industry will outright die, though there has been plenty of that as well, most people acknowledge that it is not going to come out unscathed. The question of why, therefore, is an important thing for us to ask if we hope to help the industry come out of this mess. And that is a complicated one, as most questions of why tend to be. The basic issue is, of course, that they're struggling to get people to come and watch films. This is due to reluctance because of the current health situation, of course, as well as the rise of varied and fruitful alternatives such as streaming in recent times. To add to this, few big blockbusters have been coming to the theater due to the fact that movie theater companies do not believe they would be profitable. All of these issues, I believe, are compounded by the use of government restrictions, which have been placed on theaters with the well-meaning intent of slowing the spread of coronavirus, but which cause a lot of harm in their wake. While many have argued that these other issues are important to consider as well, when talking about the current state of the movie theater industry, I would argue that such restrictions make it impossible for even those people who are not reluctant to go to theaters to go and watch a film. And as I said, the reason for a lack of blockbusters is essentially because at this point they appear to be unprofitable. This video is meant to be an appeal to the American people and a quick discussion. Our country is one which is and ought to be run. I wish to ask those individuals to consider my position on this issue so that they might then be able to defend this industry as well. I also have a somewhat secondary of asking people to be more willing to go to theaters. Obviously, a lot of this is caused by a lack of demand. And while I do not primarily intend to argue that people ought to go to theaters, I do believe that some of my arguments incidentally relate back to that issue. As I said, many of these restrictions are well intended, and of course, I do not mean to suggest that we should entirely forget about the pandemic when we are making our policy decisions. And to compound this, I know that there has been a second wave recently, which has led to a new round of lockdowns and economic restrictions being put into place. I do not necessarily mean to suggest that these things ought not be done, but to merely suggest that seeing as many theaters were not given the chance to open up as quickly as other industries last time around when opening ups were happening, that we should be quicker to allow them to open up. As far as I can tell, generally, indoor dining was allowed before movie theaters, for example. But according to spoken with by the Los Angeles Times, indoor dining establishments and bars, which, as I said, in many locations were allowed to open up prior to the opening up of movie theaters, are in fact more dangerous than movie theaters. Rated by these experts on a scale of 1 to 10 as an 80, indoor movies were rated between 50 and 60. It does seem that some of the implementation of these restrictions have been somewhat hypocritical. Moving on, I would like to establish to a greater extent the nature of this problem and who it is dangerous for. There's been a lot of talk of essential businesses, yet I think it is more difficult than has generally been dealt with to establish what is essential and what is not. For the basic reason that all of these businesses provide opportunity for jobs. Only by being allowed to make their living are people able to actually continue continue to survive and thrive. This is especially important as we reach the end of the year and many people's unemployment insurance runs out. We should therefore consider, when we are asking what is essential, how many people will be hurt by things not being met. For an example of how many people can be hurt by these things, when Cineworld closed all of its theaters in the United States and the UK, Cineworld being the parent company of Regal Theaters, 45,000 jobs were affected. Open up, and that was when they closed down voluntarily. But it does seem they were unable to operate under the restrictions that were currently in place. They would be making more money, it seemed to them, if they would just waited out this storm for a little while longer, at which time they could hire no one. It also affects the consumer. The question one must ask when dealing with the issue of movie theaters is, what exactly are movie theaters selling? I can watch a movie at home and have been able to for 50 years. Instead, movie theaters offer a certain environment for the better appreciation of the arts. And beyond this, they offer a location and an opportunity for social experiences. And man being social animals, we require such things. And it is very important that we do not lose such a part of our culture or such ability to connect to others. As I said, there are many problems with this, problems restricting theaters, and there are many reasons why that people are unable to go, not merely government restrictions. And so, as always, one must ask, would things actually improve if my solution were put in place? And is the problem I have identified truly the most important problem for this issue? Are people so unwilling to go to theaters that there would be little effect even if they were allowed to go to theaters? One story I read on this issue, which was published about the theaters being allowed to open in October in New York, described how people interviewed in the line were going to a movie they were not even that interested to see, just because they were happy to go to a theater, not for the movie itself specifically, which goes back to what I was saying about what movie theaters offer. It's not necessarily about the movie, it's about something more. And others who have had the ability to go see private viewings, which many theaters have begun to offer, but which restrictions still affect, and many theaters have been not allowed to offer. They have said that they were so excited to be able to watch a movie in a theater at all. Again, not even necessarily because of the movie, but because of the atmosphere which they were able to partake in. Despite the many critics saying that theaters' problems run deeper than merely these restrictions, which I do agree that they do, it is obvious that if theaters were able to open, there are those who are excited to go and willing and even desirous to. I spoke before about Regal Cinemas closing down, and I said that despite them closing down, not because they were told to by government, but instead because of that they found restrictions caused them to be making no money, that issue should probably be somewhat explained. You see, key markets such as New York City and Los Angeles, which are highly important for the box office, had not opened up. These key markets had not opened up yet, which together made up about 17% of the American box office. Therefore, even though they had been working, a major portion of their income was cut off due to the fear of many people of letting theaters open. Another important thing to consider is that there has not yet been a major surge associated with theaters. Obviously, this is partly because there has not been all that much data on the issue. Many theaters were allowed to be open since August, and yet still there has been no breakout associated with theaters. Despite the theoretical danger they pose, one must ask if the data of what has actually been happening supports that. Now, I would like to stress, I'm not saying that they are not dangerous. For obvious reasons, they are. But I am suggesting that their opening up is not necessarily an existential threat to the public health of this nation, and that they should be treated in a responsible fashion. Public health experts have argued that if theaters were to open up in a way that followed the rules and was safe and considerable, then they would likely be not that dangerous at all. This would require people to wear masks properly, remain sort of quiet. And it's amazing. We need to be quiet in movie theaters. I don't know if that's something that has ever crossed anyone's mind before. Nonetheless, there are, of course, problems with many of the safest ways to open up. Health experts have also noted that concessions make them more dangerous. And I understand where that comes from. But it must also be understood that the banning of the selling of concessions is essentially a banning on the exhibition of film. Since above 80% of the revenue drawn in by theaters is gotten through their concessions. This is such a true fact that in San Diego, after theaters were allowed to open, if they did not offer concessions, theaters still would not open because it was just not worth it, which is a theme we've seen before. Other important things to consider when we consider whether or not movie theaters are safe is that though you are indeed asked to sit in a room full of strangers for quite a long time, this is in some ways better than other recreational activities, which have people moving in and out constantly. Instead, by sitting by the same people for an extended period of time, you have less chances of randomly coming in contact with someone who has the virus. Besides this, everyone is facing in the same direction, which is an important thing to consider. While many other establishments have people facing in different directions, basically meaning you're breathing into people's faces. By looking in the same direction, all the airflow goes in one way. Movie theaters have also been working to become more safe, and they are quite confident in the ability of their programs to help. They have worked on creating more robust ventilation systems. They have increased sanitization, and they have begun to have socially distanced seating. The issue is, of course, a complicated thing, and we must be prudent in any decision we make. But I believe we ought to consider the benefits of opening up in regards to theaters. We must consider the harm closing down theaters causes, and that we must also ask ourselves if it is really that bad to treat them to give them more room when we start opening up again. Even if many of the issues that they now face are not caused directly by government action, we can see that many of them struggle to deal with the issues that are presented with them because of government action, and that many of those things restrictions which have been put in place have meant that even when and where they could open up, such as in San Diego, or the example with Cineworld shutting down due to heavy restrictions in important market areas, it has just not been worth it. If we would like to see this part of our lives restored, and if we would like to see those entrepreneurs and other business people who run theaters and those opportunities for jobs open up, I would suggest that we can open up theaters in a manner which is both responsible and somewhat accelerated compared to previous examples.